Born to the reigning king and queen of televangelism, he witnessed firsthand one of the largest scandals of the 1980s, the fall of PTL. Depression, drinking, and drug use followed as he searched for peace and a way to escape the pain. Salvation finally came when he found grace. He now heads his own ministry, Revolutions NYC, has been the subject of the reality TV series One Punk Under God, and has penned his autobiography, Son of a Preacher Man. With his second book, Fall to Grace, he continues to fight for a greater understanding of acceptance within the established religious community. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on Interviews, Jim and Tammy Faye's son, Pastor Jay Bakker. What's the difference between Jay Bakker and Jamie Bakker?
For me, I think Jay was just the name I got in high school. Jamie was just, for me, represented a little kid, you know. I guess a little kid you saw in PTL, and when I got in high school, I just kind of wanted to fit in a little bit more, and so I just said, start calling me Jay, and that's what happened. You know, also it was a friend of mine growing up named Jay, who I really always looked up to. So.
Jamie Charles exist anymore, though? Anybody refer to you that way?
I mean, there's some people who refer to me that way, old people who used to follow my parents, and every now and then my dad will say that, but, you know, not very often.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about grace. And I start with grace with, well, I'll let you explain it first, and then I've got a few questions on it.
Well, for me, you know, reason I've written a book on grace is because it's not that easy for me to always explain, but it starts with inclusion and accepting that you're accepted, even accepting the unacceptable parts of your life. Because only when we're able to accept those things that seem unacceptable to us or others are we able to really confront and deal with them things. So for me, it's an idea of realizing you're accepted by something which is greater than you.
Safe to say God loves you no matter who you are.
Yeah,
and
or what you've done.
Okay, and the problem that I think people have with this is, but what happens to responsibility? Where is the, you can sin and God loves you. Don't you have to be good for God to love you? Well,
that would make it probably not free anymore. If grace is free, and it would be like someone giving you a car and then asking you to make payments for it. It's definitely nothing, I don't think it's fair, and I think that's the beauty of grace. But also the fact is I believe grace is transformative. I believe it transforms our lives and creates us. I mean, when I was a drinker, and I was a very heavy drinker, I couldn't quit. I tried quitting for my parents. I tried quitting for my family. I tried quitting for God. I tried quitting for everything. And I think it was that moment of pure acceptance when I realized it didn't make a difference in my life anymore, of as far as where I stood with God. And so once I realized that, it didn't really matter where I stood with anybody else. And over time, that's why I decided to get sober, is because it was such a transformative thing, and I was able to get sober for myself. I wasn't doing it out of guilt or a need to fulfill some sort of spiritual responsibility. Also, I think in Christianity, if you look at the title Christianity, is to be a follower of Christ. And I think when a lot of people look at grace, they look at it as like this salvation ticket. And that's fine, you know. But for me, it's, you know, if you want to follow Christ, you have to follow Christ's example. And I think grace gives us the ability to do that, you know, to love our enemies, to do good to those who persecute us, to take care of the poor and the widow. Loving people is not easy, you know. It's easy to love a few people you choose to love, but when the Bible's saying, you know, love everybody, you've got an issue there. So I see the grace is what gives us the power to be followers of Christ. I think people make the mistake of focusing on word or think it's a license to sin, but you know, at the same time, I don't know if people actually understand what sin is and all that, you know.
You talk about back when you were drinking very heavily, and you had a friend who would drive you to the bar, sit there with you while you drank. When you got so drunk, he would drive you home. When you couldn't get the key in the door, he would open the door for you.
Yeah.
When I look at that story, and I think a lot of people do, you feel like, wasn't he an enabler?
Right.
Why is that grace and why is that good, as opposed to enabling and bad?
Well, because I'd had a million people say, you know, it's bad and it's wrong, and that never worked for me. What worked for me was someone who was a friend who loved me despite that, and embraced me despite that. And it was just that kind of thing of it took its power away. You know, it took the power of, you know, you shouldn't be doing this, and this constant like, oh, you know, I shouldn't be doing this, and I'm wrong, and I'm bad, you know, and then it would just kind of create this like revolving habit of like, oh, I feel bad, I feel horrible, so I'm going to drink, you know, and then, you know, and because I drink, I feel bad and I feel horrible, you know, and because I can't drive, or I did drink and drive last night, or because of that, you know what I mean? It was a spiral, and what it kind of did was it just took that spiral away, you know, and all of a sudden when you take some of that pain and some of that guilt out of it, you're able to take a look at it in a different way.
Okay, take me all the way back, because a lot of people are going to be saying, where did you come by this knowledge? You, of all people, how did this happen for you?
Well, I think because I grew up watching my parents and what happened with my parents when their ministry fell apart, and I saw how people reacted and responded, and, you know, that was pretty harsh. And then I continued to live in a Christianity that was, you know, our way or the highway. And it was actually the same friend who took me around like that when I said, you know, I feel like God hates me because I can't live up to these expectations. Christianity seems like this impossible thing, you know, this club, this moral club that I can't be a part of. And he said, you know, you're full of it. And due to TV, I won't say full of what, but he said, you know, he's like, you know, you're full of it, and you're trying to earn your salvation, you're trying to earn God's approval, and you can't do it. God loves you just the way you are. And I said, well, whatever helps you sleep at night, honestly, because I thought this was just his own ideas of God. And what happened was I said, prove it to me, and he started showing me Galatians and Romans and Corinthians, and those verses talked about being free from the law. Now, it's talking about old law, but for me, that law represented everything I had saw in the church. Is this, you know, meet this expectation and do this in order to be acceptable. And it was saying you're accepted no matter what, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done. And that's what took it off for me. I mean, it was just this whole idea of everything I saw growing up and the way I was raised, and not necessarily my parents, because they weren't really I had a lot of youth pastors and things like that. All this rigid, frightening, almost hateful control way of seeing things didn't exist anymore because it didn't appear to me in the Bible. And so that changed my life. I mean, and that's why I wrote so much about it in the second book, as that second book is actually, Fall of Grace is actually based off of the book of Galatians, the first book I read when I really understood grace.
It's fair to say you rebelled.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very fair statement. But why didn't you rebel against God, per se? Why wasn't all of this went bad, my family had dedicated their lives to this, I'm done with it? Why did that piece stay with you?
Well, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't rebel against God. I rebelled in the way of just ignored anything. Like, I just wanted to live my life, and I didn't think I could add up to God. So I ignored it. But then the guilt started to creep in, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. And so that's where it became a real struggle. Why? I think maybe my parents just always, their idea of that God loves you, you know, God loves you, he really does. My dad used to say at the end of every show. I mean, that whole idea kind of stuck with me. So I was always kind of like, maybe there's more to this, but I don't know.
Did you ever question God's existence?
Oh, I question God's existence all the time. Probably now more than ever. Yeah.
Why now more?
As I work, I learn, and I read, and I study, and I have conversations. I live in a city where many different religions are represented within just a couple blocks.
You live in New York?
You start to think, you know, how is it that I'm right? You know, what are the chances of the fact that I picked the right one? But I feel like I have the freedom to doubt, and I believe that grace gives me that freedom to doubt. And so, yeah, I deal with doubt, but it also, I feel like it strengthens my faith and causes me to look at things differently and see different things. You know, and I see so many people who go through doubt, and it seems like such a lonely thing, especially if you grew up believing in God and all this stuff, and then you start to question your faith, you know. It's such a lonely place, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of people who are going to go through it with you. And at our church, we're saying, you know, if this is something you're going through, we'll go through it with you. You know, we're not going to tell you that you can't doubt. You know, we're not going to say you can't question. We're not going to say you can't come to our church if you don't believe. You know, everybody's welcome. And we really try to make it a community that's so inclusive that we can all come together and talk about these issues, about our doubt and about our faith and about even disagreements. But we try to do it in a way that it doesn't become about being, you know, who's bad or who's wrong or who's right, you know, or get too emotional about it. Because I think that's the problem with the church is it's, you know, everybody's reacting. And so what we try to do is make a safe place for people to bring stuff where there's not a whole lot of like negative reaction.
You talk about your church, and I wonder, considering everything that happened in your past, is success a problem for you? If your church gets too big, is there a fear of comparison? Is there a certain level where you feel comfortable that the church is as big as it should be and doing what it should be doing?
I feel that way now. You know, people are always like, why don't you do TV? Why don't you do that? And I'm like, no. And it's not necessarily not wanting to be like my folks, but it's the idea of not wanting to make the same mistakes that they made. You know, my dad had to raise so much money, like $1 million every 2 days, that he created a monster that he had to feed.
Right.
You know, so things obviously started to get compromised, and you start to please people because you got to raise money from these people, and then you start to preach, you know, like, well, if you give, you receive, and it becomes about prosperity. And I don't want to fall into that trap. You know, I've been in places in my life where I've had to make decisions, and I knew it was going to cost me greatly, and it did. But then at the same point, it was like looking down into the future, you know, thinking like, well, if I got to this point, could I compromise then? You know, would I compromise for that much power, right, or that much? You know, if I'm sitting in the office with the President of the United States, like my dad did with 3 presidents, you know, at that point, am I going to compromise so I can stay in those rooms, you know, or I can keep that income flowing, or, you know? So I don't want to be that. I don't want to have to compromise. And I understand it, but that's not what I see for my life. And I thank God I have the grace to take stands, and I'm willing to give up maybe a little bit of influence or a little bit of financial security in order to do that.
How do you gauge success?
Just by working every day, you know, by being able to show up and work and read and study, and, you know, I just in the church, am I loving people? Am I being true to my convictions? You know, that's how I see success. To me, it's not about numbers. You know, it's great to be able to write a book. It's great to be able to be on television and talk about that book, and do radio and talk about that book, and that does, to a certain extent, feel like success. But the point is to be as honest as I can with the message that I'm providing in the book and in those things and in these interviews and things like that. And you know, so I guess success for me is just really trying to stay true to what my convictions are, and not allowing the cameras and the lights to influence those convictions.
And you've taken a stance on the whole gay issue, and we'll talk a bit about that. But I'm curious, the freedom that you have when you learn something. Is it simply the fact that if you find something that you believe to be true, that you have a responsibility to share that truth? Yeah,
I feel like I have a total responsibility, and that if I don't share that with people, I'm not being responsible of the gifts that God's given me, the pastoring or co-pastoring of the church that I co-pastor. You know, I don't feel like, you know, I feel like I have to be honest with people. Doubt comes up a lot because there's times where I've been studying and just didn't feel it, and I've had to come into a service and say, you know, right now I don't feel it, and right now I don't know where I stand with God. You know, I don't even know if I believe in God, and you know, and I'm sorry if that, you know, hurts you, you know, but people really seem to be responsive to that, and that's the type of community we have. You know, we're not here to play games with each other. We're not going to put on a smiley face just because it's Sunday and be like, isn't God great, you know? Because, you know, there's people dealing with all sorts of stuff, you know, people losing their jobs, you know, they're losing family members, losing people they love, divorce, and so, you know, I feel like I'm doing a disservice if I'm not completely honest with people about the things that I've learned.
And I don't mean to be flippant by calling it the gay stuff or the gay issue, but talk a little bit about where you came by the opinions you did and what they are.
Well, with my opinions on LGBTQ things, which is very important to my heart and my convictions. Just over time, I grew up, you know, my parents were always very always embraced the gay community, even in the early 80s. You know, I was always surprised. They weren't affirming, you know, they weren't saying it's not a sin, but they always embraced the people to the point of just, we're going to embrace people and we're going to love them. And so I had a bit of a foundation already laid. And what happened was, you know, over time I just started to see all these people being treated horribly by the church. And I just said, once again, this doesn't line up to what I have understood. And I'm like, and I see these scriptures that say, you know, homosexuality, then this will not inherit the kingdom of God. I'm like, this just doesn't add up. So what I usually do is I study. I go to the Greek, I go to the Hebrew, I go look at the historic background of the scriptures. And my heart led me there. And, you know, then you realize it wasn't until like the 50s that the word homosexual appeared in the Bible. You see that the scriptures that people use are dealing with idol worship, rape, prostitution, spilling of seed. You know, these are the issues that it's talking about. It's not talking about gay and lesbians and bisexuals as me and you understand them today. It's dealing with very particular situations. So when you see that, there's something I was really freed by that, and I was always convicted, even before then, about how badly the gay community was treated in the church. But after reading that, I came to the conclusion that, you know, this isn't a sin. When we've turned something into a sin, that you know, that's not talked about in the Bible, and we've just decided to make it a sin. You know, some people will say, well, you know, God said man and women are one, and they say, you know, the sanctity of marriage, but, you know, they don't talk about biblical marriage was about law, about property, and that, the girl was 13 usually when they married, and how they got married is they went into a tent and had sex. I mean, they don't talk about that stuff. Yeah, that's, you know, the sanctity of marriage. Christians do not have a corner on that, period. So when you see that, and you see the hypocrisy of the church, and you see how quickly we've pushed people away, and we've caused, you know, sold people, you know, well, you can be, you know, for a while it was like, we can cure you. And now it's like, well, we can teach you how not to be gay or follow those impulses. But you see the people's lives are ruined, and people have been taking their own lives and not being able to handle this type of a thing. And you see the pain and the suffering that it causes. You realize this isn't right. This doesn't add up. The fruit is not there. There's no peace. There's no patience. There's no joy. There's suffering. Simply taking that stance, though, has ended up hurting your ministry, or did for a while. Yeah, no. I mean, I don't think we ever fully recovered. It was probably in 2004, 2005 that I took a stand as being a gay-affirming preacher, pastor in church. And we lost the majority of our support, literally within 24 hours. I had to lay off the whole staff. I had 5 staff. We had health insurance, which was a miracle. And within, you know, days, we lost all that. We had to let everybody go. And all of my speaking engagements, I mean, I spoke all over the country and all these different festivals, all were canceled. I didn't speak anywhere for a year. So, you know. Did that surprise you, or did you expect it? No, it didn't surprise me. I figured that that's what would happen. You know, it's a lot more real when you're in the midst of it, you know. But that's okay. And my parents, when I was talking to them about it beforehand, they said that this is what was going to happen. And I said, well, I know, but I said, I want to follow my convictions, you know. I mean, my heroes are Martin Luther King and Gandhi, you know. I want to be able to take those steps and those stands. And they said, well, their church is probably going to turn on you. And they were right. A lot of people in the church did. But then again, there was a lot of people in the church who embraced me and were happy to hear the message. And hopefully I feel like I've given some people the courage to take this stand with me. And I mean, you know, I'm not the only person who's taken this stand. I mean, the Evangelical Lutherans, which is the biggest group of Lutherans out of their denomination, are gay affirming. And they allow men and women in committed relationships to be pastors. You know, and that's... So it's not just like I've come up with some crazy small idea. There's a lot of other people supporting this, but it's unfortunate how we treat each other for these issues. When you look at those issues and others similar to it, and then you look at the mega churches today, which a lot of people would say, you know, your family helped create the concept of these mega churches. Definitely. You've been working with them, or go around and talk to them. Well, I've done my best to go around and talk to some of these pastors of mega churches, and I've done that with a group called Soul Force, which is a group that fights for LGBT rights in the church, and so we've gone out there to meet with some of these folks and say, hey, you know, let's bring in some your families from your church, and we'll bring in some LGBT folks and their families, and why don't we all share a meal together and talk this out? And unfortunately, when we spent a year putting that together, most people did not meet with us. or if they did, it would just be with me, or it would be totally, it was always totally on their terms. And I think for me, the sad part of that is not the fact that we didn't convince them. You know, the sad part of that is that if they think that we are sinners, and Jesus was known to being a friend of sinners, and he was known for eating with them, and that they have such a giant church that they can't even sit down and eat with people they consider sinners, I think that's the fail there. Mm-hmm. And to me, that shows the state of the church is in a very sad place when we're not even able to have conversations with each other.
Do you believe these mega churches can be as connected to their flock as the smaller churches, the individual attention?
No, and I say that because I have a congregation anywhere between 30 and 50, and I can't connect with all those folks. And that's something actually I've been really working on, is to try to meet with more members of the congregation. And we have an online, our online listeners have just grown. You know, maybe that's where it's like my family rather than television. It's the internet. You know, we have at least 1,000 people who listen online. And, you know, not being able to get to know those folks is tough, and feeling a little bit, detached from them is something that we work on, but it's nearly impossible. So yeah. I don't see how, unless there's no way for the pastor to be able to do that. So you probably have to have 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 pastors, just in order to somewhat connect to folks. Probably the best size of a church is 10 or 15,
Yeah. Little, for people that have followed you, have seen the TV show and all of that stuff, a little update on the family. That's fine. What's your dad up to? How's he doing?
My dad is doing good. He lives in Branson, Missouri, where he has a TV show and ministry. He's remarried. He has adopted 5 kids, so 4 girls and a boy. And then, of course, that keeps him really busy. He's 70, he's in his 70s now, and so he's a busy guy. My sister lives in Charlotte and just lives her life and works and just kind of stays a little bit low profile. Obviously, my mother passed away years ago, and
very disturbing to a lot of people when they saw the Larry King interview with your mom.
Yeah,
day before actually she passed away. How is it for you when you see clips of that?
I don't like to see clips of that. I was, the night they showed that, they called me in to be a part of that, and I remember saying I wanted to go see my mother. I was like, well, I'm going to go see my mom, and then my mom's husband, Roe at the time, was like, no, just do the show and then come in. And unfortunately, I did the show, and when I was going to come visit my mom on my way there, she passed, so I never got to say goodbye, and it's a bit of a regret for me. It was hard to see her that way, and a lot of people said, I don't know why she did that, she shouldn't have done that. But my mom, that's what she did. She loved people, she loved the public eye, as well as people, and she needed to do what she needed to do, and that was her choice. Yeah. So I respect that. I had not seen my mom in a couple weeks, and to see the drastic turn that she had taken was quite frightening.
Yeah,
and devastating. It's hard to watch someone slip away, and I think there's no way to put into words what it's like to lose someone unless you have lost someone that close to you.
What do you think you learned through that process?
I just learned that life is really short, and that we major in a lot of minor things in this world, and especially in Christianity, and so much of the things that we argue and fight about are just foolishness. And I have to keep an eye on myself, because sometimes I start to get back up in that game and have these arguments online with people, and it's just worthless because life is too short. That's what I learned. Love the people when you're with them. Take the time, to be with folks, and let your folks know, and let people around you who you love know how much you love them. And don't allow the little things to get in the way.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, I know in the TV show you went back and visited Heritage USA, and I guess it's being reborn again, even as we sit here. Any idea how have you been back since they started fixing it up?
I've been back once, I think, since they started fixing it up, but, still a lot of the stuff some of the stuff had been torn down and is gone for good. I guess they're trying to restart it. But yeah, it's six one way, half a dozen the other for me. It's not on my radar anymore. That was a very important part of my life as a child and growing up. But whoever's doing it, good luck with that. Yeah. For me, I've taken a different road.
So where does the road lead you now?
I hope I can write more books and talk with more people about grace and about even things like doubt and the big questions and how can we be more compassionate and loving towards each other. I hope that that's what's in my future, is to help people survive through hard things and to encourage them to love each other and love those who even persecute them. I really hope that I'm able to take a little bit of those things that my parents taught me and a lot of those things that I've seen from MLK Jr. and Gandhi and different folks like that and put those into words and show people who might not normally look at those things.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And share your story with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Jay Bakker.
To order a DVD of this or any episode of InnerVIEWS, please visit HoustonPBS.org.